The fork stopped halfway to his mouth, not because he heard her, because something in the room shifted. The music was still playing, soft jazz from the hidden speakers, the kind of music rich people played to remind everyone how tasteful they were. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier light. White linen tablecloths draped over a table long enough to seat 30. And standing at the end of it, breathing hard, her small chest rising and falling like she had just run through a burning building, was a little black girl in a faded pink dress. "Don't eat that," she said again. Her voice cut through the laughter and the clinking of silverware. The adults turned. Some looked confused, some looked annoyed. One woman at the far end of the table actually rolled her eyes and whispered something to the man beside her, but the girl didn't care. She pointed straight at the plate in front of Jonathan Hayes, her finger trembling just slightly but her eyes steady as stone. "That food has poison in it. I saw her put it there." Jonathan Hayes sat at the head of the table, his fork suspended in midair. On his plate was a perfectly seared piece of halibut over a saffron cream sauce, garnished with microgreens and edible flowers. His fiancée had chosen it specially for tonight. She had told everyone that. She had made sure every guest knew how much care she had put into selecting the menu, how she had personally overseen every detail of their engagement dinner. Vivian Cross, sitting to his right in a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than most people's rent, had been glowing all evening, until now. Vivian's smile froze. Her hand, which had been resting lightly on Jonathan's forearm, tightened just enough for him to feel it. Then she laughed. It was a soft, musical laugh, the kind of laugh designed to diffuse tension and make everyone feel like the person who caused the problem was being unreasonable. "Children," she said, turning to the guests with a practiced expression of bemusement. "They have such active imaginations." She looked at the little girl and tilted her head. "Sweetheart, I don't know what you think you saw, but running into a grown-up dinner and making accusations like that isn't very polite." The girl didn't back down. Her name was Maya and she was 8 years old. She had been coloring in the breakfast nook, the way her mother had told her to, because her mother worked in this house and sometimes brought Maya along when there was no one else to watch her. Maya had been good. She had stayed where she was supposed to stay. But then she had gotten curious about the flowers on the dining table. They were enormous arrangements, roses and peonies and something white and delicate that smelled like honey. So she had crept closer, just to see. And that was when she saw Vivian Cross slip into the kitchen through the side door. Maya had followed, not because she was nosy, because something about the way Vivian moved, quick and quiet, looking over her shoulder like she didn't want anyone to see her, made Maya feel uneasy. She had hidden near the pantry, the same way she hid when she played hide and seek with the other kids at the shelter. And she had watched as Vivian opened her silver clutch purse, took out a small white packet, and poured white powder into the sauce on one specific plate. Then she had stirred it with a spoon, wiped the spoon on a towel, and slipped the empty packet back into her purse. Maya hadn't understood what she was seeing at first, but she understood enough. Adults didn't act like that when they were doing something good, and the plate Vivian had touched had a little gold flower painted on the rim, different from all the other plates. Maya remembered that because she had noticed it earlier when the servers were setting the table. So when she saw Jonathan raise his fork to his mouth, she didn't think. She just ran. Now she stood in the middle of the dining room, surrounded by people in expensive clothes who were looking at her like she was a bug that had flown into their champagne. Her mother, Grace, came running from the service hallway, her face pale with fear. "Maya," she said, grabbing her daughter's shoulders. "What are you doing? I told you to stay in the nook." "I'm sorry, Mama," Maya said, "but I had to. He was going to eat it." Grace's eyes darted to Jonathan, then to Vivian, then back to her daughter. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She was terrified. Maya could see it. Her mother was always terrified in places like this, around people like this, because one wrong word could cost her the job that kept them from sleeping in the family shelter again. Jonathan set his fork down slowly. The sound of metal against porcelain seemed louder than it should have been. He looked at Maya, then at Vivian, then at the plate. His stomach was already churning, but he told himself it was nerves. This was supposed to be the perfect night. The engagement had been announced 2 months ago. Vivian was beautiful, charming, well-connected. His mother adored her. His business partners approved of her. Everything about their relationship had been seamless, almost too seamless, although Jonathan had never allowed himself to think that until now. Maya, he said gently, leaning forward. What exactly did you see? Vivian's hand tightened on his arm again, harder this time. Jonathan, she said, her voice still sweet but with an edge of something sharper underneath. You're not seriously going to entertain this, are you? A child who was hiding where she shouldn't have been, who probably ate too much sugar at the dessert table and is now looking for attention. I'm not looking for attention, Maya said. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away from Jonathan. I'm telling the truth. I saw her go into the kitchen. I saw her open her purse. I saw the white stuff. She pointed at the plate again, right there, in your food. A murmur rippled through the guests. An older woman near the middle of the table, someone Jonathan didn't recognize, leaned toward her husband and whispered loudly enough to be heard. These service people bring their children to work, and this is what happens. Drama. Accusations. Someone else muttered about liability and background checks. Vivian heard it, and her expression shifted into something wounded and noble, the face of a woman being unfairly attacked. She turned to the guests with tears glistening in her eyes. I don't know what to say, she said, her voice trembling. I have spent months planning this dinner. I have tried to be the best fiancé I could be. And now, on the night we were supposed to announce our wedding date, a child is accusing me of trying to poison the man I love. She pressed a hand to her chest. Her engagement ring caught the light, a massive diamond that had belonged to Jonathan's grandmother. It's humiliating. It's cruel. And frankly, I don't understand why we're still standing here listening to this. Grace pulled Maya closer, her hands shaking. Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I am so sorry. She didn't mean any harm. She's just a child. She doesn't understand what she saw. I understand, Maya said firmly. I'm not stupid. Grace winced. Baby, please. No one said you were stupid. But sometimes our eyes play tricks on us. You might have seen a chef adding seasoning. Or maybe it was flour. Maybe you just thought you saw something because you were tired. Maya shook her head, her dark curls bouncing. No, I know what I saw. She looked at Vivian. You looked around first. You checked to make sure no one was watching. Then you did it. And after you poured it in, you hid the spoon under a towel. Vivian's smile returned, thinner now. That's quite a story, she said. Very detailed, almost like you've been rehearsing it. My daughter doesn't rehearse lies, Grace said, her voice suddenly stronger. She was scared. I didn't even know she was scared. Vivian raised an eyebrow. Scared of what exactly? Of me? Of a woman who has only ever been kind to her. I brought her a gift last week. A stuffed bear. Do you remember that, Maya? Or did you forget that part, when you decided to ruin my engagement dinner? Maya remembered the bear. It was white and soft and had a pink bow around its neck. She had wanted to like it, but something about the way Vivian had handed it to her, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, had made Maya feel strange. She had put the bear in the corner of her room and hadn't touched it since. I remember, Maya said quietly, but that doesn't change what I saw. Jonathan pushed his chair back and stood. The room went quiet. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that filled a space without him having to say anything. He had built his company from nothing, started in a garage when he was 22, and now he was worth more than half the people at this table combined. He was used to making decisions quickly, trusting his instincts and moving on. But nothing in his business career had prepared him for this. He looked down at the plate. The halibut was still there, the sauce pooling around it like pale gold. He thought about the last few months, the headaches that had started coming out of nowhere, the nausea that hit him at odd times, usually after dinner, usually when Vivian had cooked for him or brought him something from the kitchen. He had attributed it to stress. His mother had suggested he see a doctor. Vivian had agreed, but she had also said it was probably just his busy schedule, that he needed to rest more, that she would take care of him. And she had. She had been attentive and loving and endlessly patient. But now, standing in front of this plate with this little girl's words echoing in his ears, Jonathan felt something cold settle into his chest. He looked at Vivian. She was watching him with an expression of hurt confusion, like she couldn't understand why he was even considering this. "Jonathan," she said softly, "look at me." He did. "I love you," she said. "I would never hurt you. You know that. You know me." He did know her, or he thought he did. She was the daughter of a retired judge, well-educated, well-mannered. They had met at a charity gala 18 months ago and had been inseparable ever since. She had fit into his life perfectly, too perfectly, and he had been too grateful to question it. He turned to the guests. Other plates had already been eaten from. Some were half empty. No one else looked sick. No one was clutching their stomach or complaining of dizziness. He could feel the weight of their stares, the expectation that he would do the reasonable thing, laugh this off, reassure everyone that everything was fine. That was what a leader did. That was what a man in his position was supposed to do. But Maya was still standing there, her small hands clenched at her sides, her doll tucked under one arm. She was watching him with an expression that made his chest ache. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even fear anymore. It was disappointment. The disappointment of a child who had expected an adult to listen and was slowly realizing that maybe no one was going to. He picked up his fork. Vivian's breath caught. "Jonathan," she said, her voice barely audible, "you don't have to do this. We can have the kitchen test the food. We can call a doctor. We can handle this properly without turning our engagement dinner into a circus." He looked at her. "If the food is fine," he said, "then there's nothing to worry about." Vivian's eyes flickered, just for a second. A tiny tell that no one else in the room would have noticed. But Jonathan noticed. He had built his fortune on noticing things other people missed. He cut off a small piece of the halibut, gathered a little sauce on the fork, and raised it to his mouth. Maya took a step forward. "Please don't," she whispered. "Please." He hesitated. The fork hovered an inch from his lips. He looked at her face, at the genuine terror in her eyes, and for a moment he almost set the fork down. But then he looked at Vivian, at the guests, at his mother sitting at the far end of the table with an expression of tight-lipped disapproval. He thought about how much easier it would be to just prove the child wrong, to eat the bite, show everyone that nothing was wrong, and then quietly have Grace and her daughter escorted out. He could be generous about it. He could even give them a severance package, some money to help them get on their feet. No one would blame him. No one would even remember this tomorrow. He took the bite. The fish was good, perfectly cooked, seasoned just right. He chewed, swallowed, and set the fork down. His mouth felt dry suddenly, but he told himself it was nerves. There he said, forcing a smile, "Everything is fine. No poison. No problem." Maya stared at him, her face crumpling. She looked like she wanted to cry, but she didn't. She just stood there, holding her doll, watching him with those big, dark eyes that seemed to see straight through him. Vivian exhaled dramatically and pressed her hand to her heart. "Thank God," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I was so scared. Jonathan, I cannot believe this happened tonight." She turned to the guests with a watery smile. "I'm sorry for the disruption. Children, you know, they mean well, but they don't always understand what they're seeing." A few guests nodded. Someone murmured something about overactive imaginations. The tension in the room began to dissolve, replaced by the embarrassed relief of people who had almost witnessed something unpleasant, but had been saved at the last moment. Jonathan's mother, Eleanor Hayes, watched from her seat at the far end of the table. She was 73 years old and had survived 2 husbands, 3 recessions, and more boardroom betrayals than she could count. She had not survived by being naive. Her eyes moved from her son to Vivian to the little girl who was being pulled toward the door by her mother. Then her eyes moved to the plate. Something about the way the sauce glistened bothered her. Something about the way Vivian's relief seemed a little too theatrical bothered her more. "Ethan," she said quietly. Jonathan turned. "Mom, come here for a moment." He walked toward her, leaving Vivian at the head of the table. Eleanor took his hand and looked up at him. Her face was calm, but her grip was firm. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I'm fine," he said. "A little shaken up, but fine." She studied him. "You're pale." "I'm always pale in this lighting." She didn't smile. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine, Mom." "Sit down, Jonathan." He sat. Across the room, Grace was hurrying Maya toward the service door, her head down, her shoulders hunched. She was muttering apologies to anyone who looked at her, although no one was looking at her anymore. They had already forgotten her. They had already forgotten Maya. That was the thing about people like them. They were invisible until they caused a problem, and then they were a problem to be removed. But Maya looked back over her shoulder as her mother pulled her through the doorway. She looked at Jonathan, and Jonathan looked at her. Something passed between them in that moment, something he couldn't name. Regret, maybe, or the beginning of doubt. Then the door swung shut and she was gone. A minute passed. Jonathan's stomach cramped. He shifted in his chair, pressing his hand against his abdomen. He thought it was nerves. He had been under a lot of stress lately. The company was in the middle of a major acquisition. There were contract negotiations happening in 3 different countries. His lawyers had been calling him at all hours. Of course his stomach hurt. Anyone's stomach would hurt. Another minute passed. The cramping got worse. Heat rose up the back of his neck. The room, which had felt pleasantly warm a few minutes ago, now felt stifling. He could smell everything. The roses, the wine, the perfume of the woman sitting next to him, the faint, buttery scent of the halibut on his plate. It was too much. It was all too much. He stood up too quickly. The room tilted. His hand shot out to grab the edge of the table, but he missed. His mother was beside him in an instant, her arm around his waist, holding him upright. "Jonathan," she said, her voice sharp now. "What's happening?" "I don't know," he said. His mouth was dry. His heart was pounding. A wave of nausea rolled through him so suddenly and so violently that he had to clamp his jaw shut to keep from vomiting. Vivian rushed toward him, her face a mask of concern. "Oh my God, Jonathan, what's wrong?" She grabbed his arm, then his shoulder, then turned to the guests with wide, frightened eyes. "Someone call 911. Someone do something. Why is no one helping him?" Dr. Marcus Webb, a family friend and the head of cardiology at the city's largest hospital, was already moving. He reached Jonathan in 3 long strides, took his pulse, and frowned. "Step back, Vivian," he said. "Give him room." "What's happening to him?" Vivian demanded, her voice rising into a near scream. "He was fine. He was perfectly fine a minute ago. I don't understand." Jonathan doubled over, his hand pressed against his stomach. The pain was unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't just a cramp. It was a burning, twisting, wrenching sensation that made him want to crawl out of his own skin. His vision blurred. He could hear people talking, yelling, but their voices sounded far away, like they were at the other end of a long tunnel. Dr. Webb turned to the table. "What did he eat?" he asked. "Just the fish," someone said. "Only 1 bite." Dr. Webb's eyes moved to the plate, the one with the gold flower. "Nobody touches that plate," he said. "Nobody removes anything. Glasses, forks, napkins, nothing. I want everything preserved exactly as it is." Vivian's face crumpled. "This is a nightmare," she whispered. "This was supposed to be our engagement dinner." Eleanor Hayes looked at her then. Really looked at her, and something cold and hard moved across her face. "Vivian," she said quietly, "move away from my son." Vivian blinked. "Eleanor, I'm just trying to help. Move now." Vivian stepped back. Her hands were shaking, or perhaps they were. It was hard to tell. She pressed them together in front of her as if in prayer and looked around the room with an expression of wounded bewilderment. "Someone should get that child," she said. "The one who made the accusation. She clearly knows something." The room went quiet. Dr. Webb looked up from Jonathan. "What child?" he asked. "The little girl," Vivian said. "The one who ran in screaming about poison. She said she saw me put something in the food. If someone is poisoning Jonathan, we need to ask her what she saw." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You want us to question a child?" "I want us to find out the truth," Vivian said, her voice trembling. "Isn't that what everyone wants?" Jonathan was being lowered into a chair now, his face gray, his breathing shallow. Dr. Webb had his phone out, calling the hospital, arranging for a private ambulance. The guests stood in stunned clusters, some of them whispering, some of them just staring. The silver-haired donor who had dismissed Maya earlier now had his hand over his mouth. The woman who had rolled her eyes was crying quietly. The room that had been full of laughter and celebration 20 minutes ago now felt like a crime scene. Because that's what it was, a crime scene. And the only person who had seen it happen, the only person who had tried to stop it, had just been escorted out the service door like a problem to be disposed of. Jonathan was taken to the hospital. The ambulance rolled through the private entrance, its lights flashing across the glass doors. Dr. Webb stayed beside him, issuing instructions to the medical team, his voice calm but urgent. He took one small bite, Dr. Webb said. Symptoms started within 2 minutes. Abdominal pain, nausea, sweating, dizziness. No known food allergies. Jonathan tried to lift his head. I can walk, he said. His mother, walking beside the gurney, put a hand on his chest. You will do no such thing. Mom, he muttered. Don't mom me while you look like a man who just lost a fight with his own dinner. Under other circumstances, he might have smiled. But another wave of nausea turned his face gray, and he closed his eyes against the bright hospital lights. Behind them came the rest of the Hayes family. Jonathan's younger sister, Alicia, hurried in with her husband. His uncle Robert, a retired federal prosecutor who rarely showed emotion, walked with his jaw clenched and his coat thrown over one arm. 2 cousins followed, whispering to each other with the stiff fear of people who had spent their lives around wealth but not around real danger. And then came Grace and Maya. Grace held Maya's hand tightly as they entered the hospital lobby. Maya stood close to her mother's side, clutching her cloth doll, watching the doctors wheel Jonathan away. Grace had not wanted to come. She had said so 3 times before leaving the mansion. Mrs. Brooks, the house manager, had tried to reassure her, but Grace knew how these things worked. When rich people got hurt, poor people got blamed. She had seen it happen before. She had lived it before. But Eleanor Hayes had insisted. Your daughter tried to save my son tonight, Eleanor had said. That makes you family enough to come. Grace hadn't known what to say to that. She still didn't. In the hospital waiting area, the separation between worlds was painfully clear. The Hayes family was directed toward a private family lounge with leather chairs, fresh coffee, bottled water, and a nurse assigned only to them. Grace paused at the doorway, unsure if she was allowed to enter. Eleanor noticed. Mrs. Carter, she said, softer than before, please come in. Grace hesitated. Ma'am, we can wait outside. No, Eleanor said, you and Maya stay where I can see you. Maya climbed into a chair near the corner, her feet not touching the floor. Alicia Hayes sat across from her, still holding her phone in one hand. She studied Maya for a moment, then leaned forward. You're Maya, right? Maya nodded. I'm Jonathan's sister. Alicia's voice trembled despite her attempt to sound composed. You were the one who told him not to eat. Yes, ma'am. Alicia swallowed. What exactly did you see? Grace stiffened. Miss Hayes, she's already had a long night. I know, Alicia said quickly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to push. Maya looked down at her doll. I saw Miss Vivian put white powder in his food. The room went quiet. Uncle Robert stood near the window with his arms folded. Did anyone call the police? Eleanor answered without looking away from the hallway. Charles Benton, the family attorney, is preserving the scene. Dr. Webb ordered the plate untouched. Security is copying the cameras. Robert's eyes narrowed. Good. Because if this is what it looks like, this is no longer a family matter. Grace heard the words and felt Maya's hand tighten around hers. Inside the exam room, nurses worked quickly. Jonathan was connected to a monitor. Blood was drawn. Medication was given to settle the nausea and cramping. Dr. Webb watched every reading with the focused calm of a man who had treated Jonathan for years and had never seen anything like this. After some time, Jonathan's breathing steadied. Color slowly returned to his face. The worst of the nausea passed, leaving behind weakness, anger, and a humiliation that sat deeper than the sickness. Dr. Webb leaned over him. You're stable. Jonathan opened his eyes. That sounded like the good version of a bad sentence. It is. Webb pulled off his gloves. You were lucky. Very lucky. How lucky? Webb paused. You took one bite. If you had eaten the full serving, we might be having this conversation in intensive care, or not at all. Jonathan turned his head toward the ceiling. Maya's voice came back to him. Don't eat it. He saw her small hands on the plate. He saw himself taking it back. That memory struck harder than the pain in his stomach. A nurse stepped in. Your family is waiting. Your mother is threatening to reorganize the entire hospital if she doesn't see you soon. Webb sighed. That sounds like Eleanor. A few minutes later, Jonathan was moved to a private room. The lights were dimmer there. The windows looked out over the city where traffic moved in thin streams of red and white. Jonathan lay propped against the pillows, an IV line taped to his hand, his suit jacket gone, his shirt collar open. Eleanor entered first. For a moment she was not the iron-willed matriarch of the Hayes family. She was simply a mother looking at her son in a hospital bed. "You scared me," she said. "I'm sorry. I'm not interested in apologies yet." Her mouth tightened, almost a smile, then faded. She sat beside him and touched his hand. "Why did you eat it, Jonathan?" He looked away. "Because I wanted to believe Maya was wrong." Eleanor did not answer immediately. Then she said, "Wanting a child to be mistaken is not the same as proving she is." "I know, do you?" He closed his eyes. "I took the plate from her." His mother's face softened. "Yes, you did." The door opened again and Alicia stepped in with Uncle Robert. They both looked relieved, though Robert hid his behind a hard expression. "Still with us?" Robert asked. "Unfortunately for my enemies," Jonathan said weakly. Alicia came to the other side of the bed. "You look awful." "Good to see you too. I'm touched." The small exchange eased the room for half a breath. Then reality returned. Robert lowered his voice. "Dr. Webb says the police may need to be involved." Jonathan looked at him. "Not may. Will." Eleanor watched him closely. "You're sure?" "I became sure about 60 seconds after I told everyone the food was fine." No one laughed. A knock sounded at the door. Grace stood outside with Maya beside her. Grace looked as though she wanted to disappear into the wall. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. "I said come in," Eleanor said. Grace entered slowly. Maya stayed close to her mother, doll tucked under one arm. Her eyes went straight to Jonathan. He looked back at her for a long moment. The room seemed to understand that something important was passing between them. Jonathan spoke first. "Maya." "Yes, sir. I should have listened to you." Maya did not look proud. She did not look pleased to be right. She looked like a child who had been carrying something too heavy and was finally allowed to set part of it down. "I tried to stop you," she said. "I know, you took the plate back." "Yes," Jonathan said quietly, "I did." Alicia looked away, blinking fast. Grace pressed her lips together. Jonathan continued. "That was my mistake, not yours." Maya thought about that. "Are you going to be okay?" "Dr. Webb says I will." She nodded once, serious and small. "Good." The door opened before anyone could say more. Vivian Cross entered with a tissue in one hand and tears shining on her face. "Jonathan," she breathed. Everyone turned. Vivian had changed nothing about her appearance except the expression. Her champagne gown was still perfect. Her hair still fell neatly over one shoulder. The engagement ring still flashed on her finger. But now she looked fragile, devastated, almost theatrical in her grief. She rushed toward the bed. "Oh, thank God," she said, her voice breaking. "I was losing my mind out there. No one would tell me anything. I thought I had lost you." Eleanor stood. Vivian stopped just short of the bed, as if noticing the room's coldness for the first time. "Why is everyone looking at me like that?" she asked, pressing the tissue to her mouth. "Jonathan, please say something." Jonathan studied her. This was the woman who had stood beside him at charity galas. The woman who had kissed his cheek beneath camera flashes. The woman who had helped plan tonight's dinner and smiled while Maya begged him not to eat. Now she looked like the victim of the evening. "I'm alive," Jonathan said. Vivian gave a wounded little laugh through her tears. "That's all you have to say to me." "What would you like me to say?" She stepped closer. "That you know I would never hurt you. That you know this whole thing is some terrible misunderstanding." Grace felt Maya shift beside her. Vivian noticed the child and seemed to fold even further into sorrow. "And she's here," Vivian whispered as though Maya's presence injured her. "Jonathan, I cannot believe this. That little girl accused me in front of everyone. She turned our engagement dinner into a nightmare. And now she's standing in your hospital room as if she belongs here." Eleanor's voice was sharp. "Careful." Vivian looked at her. "Eleanor, I am the one being accused of poisoning the man I love. Am I not allowed to be upset?" "You are allowed to be upset," Robert said from near the wall. "You are not allowed to intimidate a witness." Vivian stared at him. "A witness? She is a child." Maya lifted her chin. "I saw you." Vivian's tears paused only for a second. Then she covered her face again. "This is cruel. I checked the kitchen because I wanted everything perfect. I touched the plate. Yes, maybe I did, but not like that. Not the way she says. Jonathan, you know me." Jonathan did not answer. Vivian moved closer to the bed, her voice softening into something intimate. "Baby, look at me. We were supposed to announce our wedding date tonight. We were supposed to be happy. Please don't let fear and confusion destroy us." Jonathan looked at his mother, then at Grace, then at Maya. Finally, Jonathan turned back to Vivian. "Dr. Webb ordered the plate preserved." Vivian blinked. "Of course, that makes sense. The food is being tested. I would expect nothing less." "The kitchen cameras are being pulled." That was when something changed. Not much, not enough for everyone to see, but Jonathan saw it. Alina saw it too, a slight tightening around Vivian's mouth, a small delay before the next breath. Then she recovered. "Good," Vivian said. "Then the cameras will prove I did nothing wrong." "Maybe they will," Jonathan said. The room held its breath. Vivian's tears returned, but now they seemed to arrive with effort. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I came here because I love you and I am being treated like a criminal." "No one called you that," Robert said. "You didn't have to." She turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Jonathan. "Pitiful and beautiful under the hospital lights. When you're ready to remember who stood by you, call me." She left before anyone could answer. For several seconds no one spoke. Then Maya said very quietly, "She looked scared when you said cameras." Jonathan looked at her. Grace touched Maya's shoulder. "Baby, no," Jonathan said, "let her speak." Maya met his eyes. "She didn't look scared when you were sick. She looked scared when you said cameras." Alina slowly sat back down. Dr. Webb returned just then, holding a chart. He looked around the room, sensing the shift. "Did I miss something?" Jonathan's gaze stayed on the door Vivian had closed behind her. "No," he said. "I think we're just beginning." That night, as the hospital settled into its quieter hours and the machines beside Jonathan's bed kept steady rhythm, the Hayes family remained close. Grace and Maya were given a small room nearby to rest, though Grace sat awake for a long time, one hand on her daughter's back, staring at the wall. Jonathan did not sleep much either. Pain had brought him to the hospital. Maya's warning had followed him there. But Vivian's face when he mentioned the cameras stayed with him most of all. By dawn, he knew three things with a clarity that made his stomach turn again. Someone had put something in his food. A child had seen it happen. And the woman he was supposed to marry was far more afraid of the truth than she had ever been of losing him. Morning came slowly to the private hospital suite, not with birdsong or sunlight, but with the soft beeping of monitors and the muffled footsteps of nurses changing shifts. Jonathan Hayes was awake before anyone entered the room. He had slept in pieces, never long enough to forget where he was. The IV line tugged lightly at the back of his hand whenever he moved. His stomach still felt tender, as if a fist had been pressed there all night. But the nausea had eased, and his mind, finally clear of pain, had begun to do what it had done all his adult life. Line up facts, question motives, and look for the weak point in a lie. There were too many facts now to ignore. Maya had warned him. He had eaten anyway. His body had reacted almost immediately. Vivian had seemed more wounded by the accusation than frightened by his illness. And when he mentioned the kitchen cameras, her face had changed, only for a second. But Jonathan had built an empire by noticing seconds other men dismissed. A quiet knock came at the door. Dr. Marcus Webb stepped in, wearing the same tired suit pants from the night before and a fresh white coat over his shirt. He carried a tablet in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other. "You look better," Webb said. "I feel like I lost an argument with my own arrogance." "That may be the most accurate diagnosis you've given yourself." Jonathan shifted against the pillows. "Do we know what it was?" "Not yet. The full toxicology report will take time. The preliminary blood work shows irritation consistent with ingestion of a foreign substance, but I'm not going to guess on record. You're stable. Your heart rhythm is normal. No organ distress, that's the good news, and the bad." Webb lowered the tablet. "The speed of your symptoms bothers me. This wasn't bad fish. It wasn't nerves. Something triggered that reaction." Jonathan looked toward the window. The city beyond the glass looked clean in the morning light, almost innocent. "If I'd eaten the whole plate." Webb did not soften it. "You would have been in serious trouble." Jonathan nodded once. He had already known, but hearing it from Marcus made the truth heavier. The door opened again before he could speak. Eleanor Hayes came in with 2 paper cups of coffee, one in each hand, dressed in the same clothes from the night before except for a gray cardigan someone had brought from home. She looked composed because she believed composure was a duty, not because she felt it. "I brought you coffee," she said to Webb, not to Jonathan. "Jonathan will drink whatever the nurses allow and be grateful." Jonathan gave her a tired look. "I'm 42 years old. You are my son in a hospital bed. Age has been temporarily suspended." Webb accepted the coffee. "Thank you, Eleanor." She took the chair beside Jonathan and studied him. Charles Benton called. "The plate is locked in the estate refrigerator under security watch. The utensils, glass, and napkin are bagged. The kitchen camera footage has been copied twice." "Who has access?" Jonathan asked. "Charles, Helen, and your head of security, no one else." "Vivian?" Eleanor's mouth tightened. "She called 7 times. I did not answer." Jonathan almost smiled. "Remind me never to get on your bad side. You are on it now, temporarily." Before Jonathan could reply, a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Carter, and Maya are outside." They weren't sure if this was a good time. Jonathan's expression changed. Eleanor noticed. "Let them in." Grace entered first, holding Maya's hand. She had changed out of her service dress into jeans, a plain navy sweater, and a coat that looked too thin for the hospital's cold air. Maya wore a pink cardigan over her dress from the night before. Her cloth doll was tucked beneath her arm. She walked with the careful quiet of a child who had been told too often not to take up space. Grace stopped near the door. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. We didn't want to disturb you." "You're not disturbing me," Jonathan said. His voice was rougher than he wanted. "Please come in." Maya looked at the machines beside the bed. "Are those helping you?" "They are mostly annoying me," Jonathan said. "But doctor, Webb says that means I'm improving." Webb nodded solemnly. "Complaining is often a positive sign." Maya came a few steps closer. "Does your stomach still hurt?" "A little, not like last night." She nodded, considering this with grave importance. "Good." Grace placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Maya wanted to check on you before we went home." Jonathan looked from Grace to Maya. "I'm glad you came. There's something I need to say." Grace's posture tightened as though bracing for blame. Jonathan saw it and hated that she had expected it. "Maya," he said, "last night you tried to warn me. You tried more than once. You even took the plate away from me." Maya looked down. "You took it back." "Yes," he said, "I did." No one moved. Jonathan swallowed, feeling the shame of it settle in his throat. "That was my mistake, not yours. I should have stopped. I should have listened." Maya lifted her eyes. "You didn't believe me." "No," Jonathan said, "I didn't. And I am sorry." The apology was simple, but it changed the air in the room. Grace blinked as if apologies from men like Jonathan Hayes were not things she had prepared herself to receive. Eleanor watched her son with a quiet expression that held both pain and approval. Maya did not rush to forgive him. Children often understood apologies better than adults did. They knew when words were just words and when they cost something. After a moment she said, "I wasn't trying to ruin your party." "I know. Miss Vivian said I was being cruel." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "You were not cruel. She said I was making up stories." "You were not." Maya held her doll a little closer. "I saw her." Jonathan leaned forward slightly, ignoring the pull of the IV. "Can you tell me again only what you remember? Nobody is angry. Nobody is going to interrupt you." Grace looked uneasy. "Mr. Hayes, she's had a lot happen." "She has," Jonathan said, "and if you want me to stop, I will. But what Maya saw matters. I want her to know we're listening now." That last word landed softly. "Now." Grace looked down at her daughter. "Only if you want to, baby." Maya took a breath. "I was coloring by the little table. Then I went to see the flowers because they were pretty. I saw Miss Vivian come into the kitchen. She didn't see me because I was by the pantry." "Was anyone else in the kitchen?" Dr. Webb asked gently. "The cooks were by the stove. Mama was gone. Mrs. Brooks was in the dining room." Jonathan nodded. "What did Vivian do?" "She looked around first," Maya said, "like when somebody checks if they're alone. Then she opened her purse. It was shiny silver. She took out a little white paper thing. Not a jar, not a spoon. A packet." Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "She opened it," Maya continued. "And she put the white stuff in the sauce on your plate. Then she stirred it." "With what?" Dr. Webb asked. "A spoon. Then she put the spoon under a towel." Jonathan looked at Dr. Webb. Dr. Webb looked back, already making a note on his tablet. Maya's brow furrowed as she concentrated. "Then the man came." Jonathan's voice remained calm, though every nerve in him tightened. "Tell me about the man. He was at the back door. He didn't come all the way in. He had a black jacket. Miss Vivian gave him an envelope. Did you hear what they said?" Maya hesitated. "Not all. The man said something like 'tonight has to work,' I remember, because he sounded mad." Grace's hand went to her mouth. Alina stood slowly and walked toward the window, not because she wanted the view, but because her anger needed somewhere to go. Jonathan kept his eyes on Maya. "Did Vivian see you?" "No, I don't think so. But later at the table she looked at me like maybe she knew I knew." That sentence sat in the room like smoke. Dr. Webb closed his tablet. "Jonathan, this needs to go to law enforcement." "It will," Jonathan said. "But first, I want the food results and the camera footage." As if summoned by the words, Jonathan's phone buzzed on the table beside the bed. Alina picked it up and glanced at the screen. "Charles." Jonathan reached for it, put him on speaker. Alina tapped the screen. Charles Benton's voice filled the room, calm but strained. "Jonathan, I have Helen and security with me. We reviewed the kitchen footage." Jonathan sat a little straighter. Benton paused just long enough for everyone to feel it. "The child's account matches the video." Grace closed her eyes. Maya did not smile. She only stood there, small and still, as if the truth being confirmed did not make it lighter. Benton continued. "Vivian enters the kitchen at 7:42 p.m. She removes something from her purse, opens it, and appears to add it to the sauce on your plate. Maya is visible near the pantry door. At 7:44, an unidentified male appears at the rear service entrance. Vivian hands him what looks like an envelope. We don't have audio from that camera." Jonathan's face went cold. "Save the footage in 3 places," he said. "One off-site. Nobody touches the original system." "Already done," Benton said. "The spoon. Helen found it under a folded towel near the prep station. Bagged, the packet not recovered yet." Jonathan looked toward Maya. "She may have taken it with her." Benton understood. "We'll check the trash, the sink, and exterior bins." Alina spoke then, her voice controlled but sharp. "Charles, Vivian is not to enter the house. She has already tried calling security. And I told them she is barred from the property until further notice." "Good," Jonathan said. Benton's voice lowered. "Jonathan, there is something else. I don't want to get ahead of the evidence, but Helen remembered Vivian spent time in your study last week. She said Vivian claimed she was looking for an old engagement photo of your parents." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "There are no engagement photos of my parents in my study. I know." A silence followed. Jonathan ended the call after giving more instructions. When the room went quiet again, the truth felt larger than before. It was no longer a frightening accusation made during dinner. It had a timestamp, a camera angle, a spoon in a bag, a man at the back door. Jonathan looked at Maya. "You told the truth." Maya answered softly. "I said I did." The words were not rude, they were not proud. They were the plain statement of a child who had been made to defend reality. Jonathan felt something in his chest twist. "You shouldn't have had to prove it this way," he said. Grace looked at him then. Really looked at him, perhaps for the first time, not as an employer, but as a man who was beginning to understand a very old unfairness. "Children like Maya often do," she said quietly. No one corrected her. A few minutes later, Dr. Webb insisted Jonathan needed rest. Alina offered to have a car take Grace and Maya back to the estate, but Maya lingered near the bed. Jonathan noticed. "Something else, Maya?" She nodded. "When Miss Vivian came in here last night, she looked scared when you said cameras. I remember. She wasn't scared when you were sick." Alina turned from the window. Maya's voice stayed even. She was loud but not scared. For a moment, even Dr. Webb said nothing. Jonathan looked at the child who had seen too much and still spoke gently. Then he said, "I believe you." This time he said it before another test, before another video, before another adult confirmed her words. Maya's shoulders lowered just a little. Outside the hospital window, morning had fully arrived. Cars moved along the street below. Somewhere in the building, a baby cried, a nurse laughed, and an elevator bell chimed as if the world had no idea that Jonathan Hayes's life had split in two. Before last night, he had believed danger came from competitors, contracts, hostile takeovers, lawsuits, and men who smiled too broadly across boardroom tables. Now he knew danger could sit beside him in a champagne gown, wearing his grandmother's ring, touching his arm, and waiting for him to take a bite. And the only person who had seen it clearly had been the little girl everyone else was ready to dismiss. Charles Benton arrived at the hospital a little after 10 that morning with a leather briefcase in one hand and the look of a man who had not slept, because the truth had kept him company all night. Jonathan was sitting up in bed when the attorney entered. His color had improved, but the weakness still showed in the careful way he moved. Eleanor sat beside the window with a cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hand. Dr. Webb had left orders that Jonathan was not to overexert himself, which everyone in the room knew Jonathan would obey only until the next important question needed answering. Benton closed the door behind him. "I brought printed stills from the kitchen footage," he said. "The digital copies are secured. One with your head of security, one with me, one in off-site storage. Helen is watching the original system like it's one of her grandchildren." Eleanor's mouth tightened. "Helen has more sense than half the board. That may be understating it," Benton said. Jonathan held out his hand. "Show me." Benton hesitated. "You should understand something before you see these. The footage is clear enough to confirm Maya's account. It is not flattering to Vivian." Jonathan looked at him. "Charles, she put something in my food. I'm past worrying about flattering." Benton opened the briefcase and removed a folder. He laid several photographs across the rolling hospital table. Jonathan looked down, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink around him. The first image showed Vivian entering the kitchen through the side hall. She was alone, her silver purse in one hand. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual. Anyone seeing only that frame might think she had come to check on dinner, just as she claimed. The second frame changed everything. Vivian stood beside the service counter, looking over her shoulder. On the counter were several plates, but one had been set apart. Jonathan's plate, the one with the gold flower near the rim. Her purse was open. One hand was inside it. The third frame showed the packet, small, white, folded. Jonathan stared at it until the edges blurred. Eleanor rose from her chair and came closer. "Dear God," she whispered. Benton said nothing. He moved to the next photograph. In that one, Vivian's hand hovered above the sauce. The white powder was faint but visible as it fell. In the corner of the frame, half hidden by the pantry door, Maya stood small and still, her doll tucked against her body. Jonathan's throat tightened. He did not look at Vivian first. He looked at Maya. "She was right there," he said quietly. "Yes," Benton said, "exactly where she said she was." The next photograph showed Vivian stirring the sauce with a spoon. The next showed her sliding that spoon beneath a folded towel. The final one showed a man standing at the rear service entrance. His face was turned slightly away from the camera, but his build, dark jacket, and posture matched Maya's description. Vivian was handing him an envelope. Eleanor touched the edge of the photo, careful not to move it. "Who is he?" "We're working on that," Benton said. "Security is running the image through private databases. We may have a partial plate from a vehicle near the service drive, but the angle is poor." Jonathan kept looking at the man in the photo. "He wasn't a guest." "No," Benton said. "He used the rear entrance. Someone either let him in or he already had access." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Vivian." "That would be my assumption," Benton said. "But assumptions won't hold in court." Jonathan pushed the table away with more force than he meant to. The wheels squeaked against the floor. "She stood beside me," he said. "She put her hand on my shoulder and watched me eat." Eleanor's face softened with pain. "Jonathan, no," he said, his voice low. "She watched Maya try to stop me. She watched me take the plate back from that child, and she said nothing." The room went quiet. That was the cruelty he could not get around. Not the money, not the embarrassment, not even the threat to his life. It was the silence. Vivian had stood there and allowed a little girl to be humiliated for telling the truth. Benton carefully placed the photos back into the folder. "The lab has the food sample. Dr. Webb requested expedited analysis because of the medical emergency. We should have a preliminary report soon." "I want the spoon tested too," Jonathan said. "It's already sealed." "The towel?" "Yes." "The trash?" Helen had the kitchen waste secured before dawn. Security found nothing obvious yet, but they're sorting it under video. Jonathan looked at him. "Good." The door opened slightly and Grace appeared in the doorway with Maya beside her. She had not meant to interrupt. It was clear from her face. A nurse had told them Jonathan was awake, and Grace had brought Maya only to say goodbye before Alina's driver took them back to the estate. "I'm sorry," Grace said. "We can come back." "No," Jonathan said. "Please come in." Maya stepped into the room. Her eyes moved from Jonathan to the folder in Benton's hands. Children were often told less than they understood, and Maya seemed to understand that the adults had been looking at what she had seen. Jonathan turned one photograph face down before she came closer, not because he wanted to hide the truth from her, but because she had already carried enough of it. "Maya," he said, "Mr. Benton brought pictures from the kitchen camera." Maya looked at her mother, then back at Jonathan. "Did it show her?" Jonathan nodded. "Yes." "Did it show the packet?" "Yes." Maya stood very still. Then she said, "So now they know." The words were simple, but they reached everyone in the room. Grace closed her eyes for a moment. "Baby." Maya looked at Jonathan. "You believe me now?" Jonathan felt the question like a hand pressing against a bruise. "Yes," he said, "I believe you." She studied his face, making sure the answer was not just something adults said to make a child quiet. Then she nodded once. Benton crouched slightly so he was closer to her height, though he kept a respectful distance. "Maya, I'm Mr. Benton. I work for Mr. Hayes. You did something very brave last night." Maya held her doll tighter. "I wasn't trying to be brave." "I know," Benton said. "Most brave people aren't." Grace wiped her palms against her jeans. "Mr. Benton, is Maya going to have to talk to police?" "Eventually, perhaps," Benton answered carefully. "But not alone and not today. We will make sure it is done properly, with your permission and with people trained to speak to children. No one is going to put her in a room and frighten her." Jonathan looked at Grace. "You have my word on that." Grace wanted to trust him. Jonathan could see the struggle in her eyes. Trust was not easy for people who could not afford mistakes. Before she could answer, Jonathan's phone buzzed on the table. Alina picked it up, checked the screen, and frowned. "Vivian." The room tightened. Jonathan held out his hand, let it ring. It stopped, then immediately began again. Alina's eyes hardened. "Persistent, she always was," Jonathan said. The phone rang a third time. This time a text followed. Alina looked at it and read silently. Her expression turned cold. "What does it say?" Jonathan asked. Alina hesitated, then handed him the phone. The message read, "We need to talk before this gets uglier. You owe me that much." Jonathan stared at the words. Something inside him settled, not peacefully but firmly. "Charles," he said, "draft a notice. Vivian Cross is not to enter my home, my offices, or any property controlled by Hayes Group. Her access cards are revoked. Her guest permissions are canceled. Her name is removed from every event list and household file by noon." Benton nodded. "Already in progress." "And the engagement?" Alina watched her son carefully. Jonathan looked at the ring mark still faintly visible on his own finger from where he had worn the matching band Vivian had insisted on for the announcement photos. "It's over," he said. No one spoke for a moment. Maya looked confused. "You mean you're not marrying her?" Jonathan turned to her. "No, I'm not." Maya considered that with the seriousness she brought to everything now. "Good." For the first time since the night before, Alina gave a small, unexpected laugh. It was brief but real. Jonathan almost laughed too, but the ache in his stomach reminded him of why they were there. Benton placed another document on the table. "There's more we need to discuss when you're ready. Helen found records showing Vivian accessed your study last week. She told Helen she was looking for a photograph of your parents. My mother's engagement album is in her house," Jonathan said. Alina lifted an eyebrow. "And she knows I would bite anyone who touched it." Benton continued. "Exactly. So either Vivian lied casually or she was looking for something else." Jonathan's face hardened. What could she reach from the study? Personal correspondence, some legal files, possibly the secondary terminal if she had help. Benton did not say the rest, but Jonathan heard it anyway. If she had help, the man at the back door was no longer just a shadow in a camera frame. He was a door into a larger plan. Dr. Webb returned before Jonathan could ask more. "I'm going to be unpopular and insist my patient rest." "I need to make calls," Jonathan said. "You need to remain alive long enough to make useful calls." Alina nodded for once. "Marcus and I agree." Jonathan looked as though he might argue, then glanced at Maya. She was watching him with the quiet expectation children bring to adults after adults have failed once already. He realized that if he wanted her to believe grown-ups could learn, he needed to start somewhere. Fine, he said, 30 minutes. An hour, Webb said. 4. Webb sighed. You bargain like a man who has never lost anything in his life. Jonathan's expression changed. I lost the illusion that I was safe in my own home. Webb's face softened. Then let the people who care about you help secure it. Grace gently touched Maya's shoulder. We should let Mr. Hayes rest. Maya nodded and turned toward the door, then paused. Mr. Jonathan, yes. When you talk to Miss Vivian, don't eat or drink anything she gives you. The room went still for half a beat. Then Jonathan nodded solemnly. I promise. Maya accepted that and left with her mother. After the door closed, Jonathan leaned back against the pillows. His body was tired, but his mind was awake and moving quickly now. The plate had proved Maya's warning. The camera had proved Vivian's lie. The man at the rear door proved there was more than one hand in the dark. By the time the preliminary lab report arrived that afternoon, Jonathan was no longer shocked by what it said. The sauce on his plate contained a foreign compound that did not belong in food. Not enough in the single bite to kill him, but enough to make him sick. Enough. Dr. Webb explained that a full serving could have caused severe distress. Jonathan read the report twice. Eleanor read it once and walked to the window. Benton removed his glasses, polished them slowly, and said, "This is attempted poisoning." Jonathan looked at the folder of camera stills, then at the lab report, then at the phone where Vivian's message still waited unanswered. "No," he said quietly. "This is the beginning of finding out what she really wanted." And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, behind gates and polished doors, the house that had hosted an engagement dinner was now a crime scene, the flowers still wilting in their vases, the champagne still sitting in its buckets, the whole beautiful, terrible night preserved like a specimen under glass. The hospital room felt smaller that afternoon, not because the walls had moved, but because the truth inside it had grown too large to ignore. Jonathan Hayes sat upright now, the IV still in place, but his posture no longer that of a patient drifting between weakness and recovery. The lab report lay open on the table beside him. The words were clinical, precise, stripped of emotion, but their meaning carried weight enough to silence any doubt. Foreign compound detected. Not consistent with standard food preparation. Ingested quantity minimal. Larger ingestion may result in severe physiological distress. Eleanor stood by the window again, though this time she was not looking outside. She was thinking the way she had always done when something threatened her family. Not loudly, not emotionally, but with a kind of cold patience that had kept the Hayes name intact through decades of business wars and personal loss. Charles Benton closed the folder after reviewing the report one last time. "This confirms intent," he said. "Not an accident, not contamination. Someone put something in that dish deliberately." Jonathan did not respond immediately. He was staring at the indentation on his finger where his engagement ring had rested just the night before. It had already faded, but he could still feel it. "Not someone," he said finally. "Vivian." Benton did not argue. "The evidence points that way." Eleanor turned from the window. "Then the question is no longer what happened. It's why." Jonathan's gaze lifted. "And how far this goes." There was a quiet knock at the door before anyone could say more. One of Jonathan's security staff stepped in. A man named Keller, broad-shouldered and efficient, the kind of man who spoke only when he had something worth saying. "Mr. Hayes," Keller said, "Miss Cross is here." The room stilled. Eleanor's expression hardened instantly. "She was told not to come." "She insisted," Keller replied. "She's in the waiting area, says she won't leave without speaking to you." Benton exhaled slowly. "That was faster than I expected." Jonathan leaned back slightly against the pillows. "Of course it was. She knows we have something." Eleanor crossed her arms. "You're not seeing her." Jonathan looked at his mother. "I am." "No, you are not, Mom. She stood there while you poisoned yourself." Eleanor said, her voice sharp. "Now you owe her nothing." Jonathan held her gaze. "I owe myself answers." Benton stepped in carefully. "If you do speak with her, it should be controlled, recorded if possible. No food, no drink, no physical contact, and someone present." Jonathan nodded once. You and Keller stay in the room. Mom, you too. Eleanor did not like it. That much was clear. But she also knew her son well enough to understand that once Jonathan decided to face something, he would not turn away. Fine, she said, but I will not be quiet if she lies. I wouldn't expect you to be. Keller stepped out to escort Vivian in. For a brief moment, the room held only anticipation, the kind that comes before a storm breaks when everyone knows the air is about to change. Then the door opened. Vivian Cross entered slowly. She had changed her clothes. The champagne gown was gone, replaced by a soft gray coat and a pale blouse underneath. Her hair was still perfectly styled, but her makeup had been adjusted to emphasize the redness around her eyes. She looked like a woman who had not slept, who had been crying, who had been wronged, or who wanted very badly to be seen that way. Jonathan, she said softly. No one invited her closer, but she stepped in anyway, stopping a few feet from the bed. Her eyes moved briefly across the room, taking in Eleanor, Benton, and Keller, calculating. You brought an audience, she said, a faint edge beneath the sadness. Jonathan's voice was calm. You didn't come here for privacy. Vivian pressed her lips together as if wounded. I came here because you almost died. I didn't, he said, because I only ate one bite. The words hung between them. Vivian took a step closer. Jonathan, please. We both know this looks bad, but you're not thinking clearly. You were sick. You were scared. That child. Stop, Jonathan said. It wasn't loud, but it was final. Vivian froze. Don't talk about Maya like that, he continued. Not in this room. Vivian's expression flickered. For a second the softness slipped. Then it returned. I'm not attacking her, she said carefully. I'm saying she misunderstood what she saw. Children do that. Children don't invent packets out of thin air, Eleanor said sharply. Vivian turned to her. Eleanor, with all due respect. None, Eleanor cut in. You lost that last night. Benton cleared his throat lightly, trying to keep the exchange from escalating too quickly. Miss Cross, perhaps you should explain your presence in the kitchen. Vivian looked back at Jonathan, ignoring Benton. I told you already. I was checking your plate. I wanted everything perfect. Jonathan didn't move. You opened your purse. Yes. You took out a packet. No. Jonathan reached to the side table and picked up one of the printed stills Benton had left. He held it up just enough for her to see. Vivian's breath caught only for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. That's you, Jonathan said. That's your hand. That's my plate. Vivian stared at the image, then shook her head. That doesn't prove anything. It's a still frame. You can't see what's in my hand. There are more, Benton said calmly, a sequence. Very clear. Vivian's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Jonathan. You're going to trust security footage over me. I'm going to trust what matches reality, Jonathan replied. Her voice rose slightly. Reality, Jonathan, I'm the woman you asked to marry you. And you are the woman who put something in my food. Vivian's composure cracked, not into panic, but into something colder. You don't actually believe that, she said. Jonathan held her gaze. I didn't believe Maya either. That landed. Vivian took a step back. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, the performance thinning. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. A very expensive mistake. Eleanor straightened. Is that a threat? It's a fact, Vivian replied, not looking at her. Jonathan, you've signed things. You've trusted me with things. You think this ends with a broken engagement. Jonathan's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. What have I signed? He asked. Vivian smiled faintly. Not warmly, not kindly. Exactly, she said. Benton stepped forward now, his tone no longer polite. Miss Cross, if you're implying access to Mr. Hayes's financial or legal authority under false pretenses, I strongly advise you to be very careful with your next words. Vivian looked at him as if he were an inconvenience. I don't take advice from employees. I am not your employee, Benton said. And neither is the law. Keller shifted slightly near the door, a subtle reminder of boundaries. Jonathan watched Vivian closely. The man at the back door, he said. Who is he? Vivian didn't answer. You handed him an envelope, Jonathan continued. He said something about tonight has to work. What was supposed to work, still nothing. Jonathan leaned forward slightly despite the discomfort. Was I supposed to get sick or something worse? Vivian's silence stretched. Then she sighed as if tired of the entire conversation. You're asking the wrong questions, she said. Then give me the right ones. She looked at him, and for the first time there was no softness left at all. The right question, she said, is how much damage you're willing to do to yourself to prove I'm your enemy. Alina let out a sharp breath. Get out. Vivian didn't move. Jonathan spoke instead. The engagement is over. That landed harder than anything else. Vivian's jaw tightened. You're serious? Yes. And you think you can just walk away? I know I can. She studied him, measuring, recalculating. Then she gave a small, humorless laugh. You always did believe you were in control. I am, Jonathan said. Vivian shook her head slowly, not this time. She turned toward the door, then paused, glancing back at him. When you figure out what you've really stepped into, she said, you'll wish you had listened to me instead of that child. Jonathan didn't respond. Vivian looked at the empty space in the room where Maya had stood as if the girl were still there, then back at Jonathan. Good luck, she said softly. And then she left. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Alina said very calmly, she knows something we don't. Benton nodded, and she's confident enough to say it out loud. Jonathan leaned back against the pillows, his body still recovering but his mind sharper than it had been in years. She's not afraid of being caught, he said. She's afraid of what we'll find if we keep looking. Keller stepped closer. Sir, what are your instructions? Jonathan's gaze moved to the lab report, then to the photographs, then to the door Vivian had just walked through. Lock everything down, he said. Financial records, access logs, staff movements. I want a full audit of every document I've signed in the last 3 months. Benton nodded. I'll start immediately. And find that man, Jonathan added. I want a name. Keller gave a short nod. Yes, sir. Alina watched her son carefully. Jonathan, this may not be small. He met her eyes. I know, he said. For the first time since the night before, there was no hesitation in his voice. The engagement had ended. The illusion had shattered. What remained was something far more dangerous than betrayal. It was a plan, and Jonathan Hayes had just stepped directly into it. The shift from shock to strategy happened quietly, almost without announcement. By late afternoon, Jonathan Hayes was no longer a patient recovering from a near poisoning. He was a man rebuilding control. The hospital room had turned into something closer to a command center. Benton had set up his laptop on the small table by the window. Keller moved in and out with updates from the estate. Alina remained seated, but her stillness carried more authority than anyone else's movement. Jonathan watched them all, then said, start from the beginning. Benton looked up. The last 3 months, yes. Every document I signed, every transfer, every authorization Vivian had access to. Benton nodded and began typing. We've already pulled your digital signature logs. There are irregularities. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. Define irregular. Documents signed late at night. Some from your secondary device, a few from your home terminal. Timing overlaps with evenings you reported feeling unwell. Dr. Webb, who had returned to check on Jonathan's condition, folded his arms. You had recurring symptoms. Mild nausea, headaches, fatigue. You dismissed them as stress. Jonathan exhaled slowly because they felt like stress. Webb met his gaze. They also matched low-dose exposure over time. The implications settled heavily into the room. Alina spoke first. You're saying this wasn't one night. Webb didn't soften it. I'm saying it's possible last night wasn't the first time. Jonathan leaned back slightly, absorbing it. She's been doing this longer. Benton turned the laptop toward him. These are the documents signed during that window. He scrolled slowly. Some are routine, others are not. Jonathan scanned the list. Most were familiar: board approvals, investment renewals, foundation distributions. Then one line caught his attention. Temporary oversight authorization. Hayes Foundation. What is that? He asked. Benton clicked the file. It grants Vivian limited supervisory authority over certain foundation funds in the event of your temporary incapacity. Jonathan's jaw tightened. I don't remember signing this. The signature matches, Benton said carefully, but the timing, he pointed. It was signed at 11:47 p.m., 3 weeks ago. Jonathan frowned. That night he stopped. You called me the next morning, Webb said, complaining of dizziness and stomach pain. Alina turned slowly toward Jonathan. You signed that while you were unwell. Yes, Benton said, and that's not all. He opened another file, conditional asset access clause. Jonathan read it once, then again. If I become medically incapacitated, he said slowly. Vivian gains temporary control over designated financial channels. Alina's voice dropped. How much control? Enough, Benton said, to move money. Not permanently, but enough to redirect assets, initiate transfers, and influence decisions. Silence. Jonathan stared at the screen. She wasn't just trying to hurt me. No, Benton said. She was preparing for you to be unable to stop her. Webb added quietly, if your symptoms had been worse if you had eaten more. Jonathan finished the thought. I might not have been in a position to question anything. Alina stood and walked slowly across the room. She planned this. Yes, Jonathan said, and she expected it to look natural. Benton leaned forward. There's more. We traced several small transfers from the foundation over the past month. Nothing large enough to trigger alarms individually. But together, how much? Jonathan asked. Just under 3 million. Alina stopped mid-step. From the children's fund, Benton nodded. Jonathan's expression hardened in a way none of them had seen before. Not anger alone, something colder, more deliberate. She used my foundation, he said. She used money meant for kids. Webb shook his head. That's a different kind of line. Jonathan didn't respond. He was already thinking ahead. Where did the money go? Layered accounts, Benton said. Shell companies. We're tracing them now, but there's a pattern. These accounts connect to a name that's come up before. Jonathan looked up. The man at the door. Benton nodded. We ran facial recognition from the footage. Partial match. Marcus Webb's eyes narrowed. I know that name. Jonathan turned to him. Tell me. Financial operator, Webb said. Not legitimate. Works in gray zones. Has been tied to structured fraud cases, asset diversion schemes, and high net worth targeting. Never convicted, always disappears before charges stick. Alina's voice sharpened. And my future daughter-in-law was handing him envelopes in my kitchen. Jonathan let out a slow breath. So this wasn't random. No, Benton said. This is organized. Webb added. And patient. Jonathan looked at the lab report again, then at the photo, then at the files on Benton's screen. Every piece now connected into something larger. She needed me weak, he said. Not dead immediately. Just impaired, confused, signing things I wouldn't normally sign. And eventually, Alina asked. Jonathan met her eyes. Eventually, she controls everything. No one disagreed. The room felt colder now, even under the hospital lights. Keller stepped forward. Sir, security sweep of the house found something else. Jonathan nodded. Go on, your study, Keller said. We found a micro recorder under the desk. Benton froze. A recorder. Yes, active, transmitting. Alina's face went still. For how long? We're still analyzing, Keller replied. But initial estimate at least 2 weeks. Jonathan's voice dropped. She was listening. Not just listening, Benton said. Collecting leverage. Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment. Conversations, financial discussions, personal reflections. All of it potentially recorded. All right, he said, opening them again. We escalate. Benton nodded immediately. I agree. This goes beyond private legal handling. Alina added police. Webb corrected gently. Federal. Jonathan looked at each of them in turn. We do this carefully. No leaks. No public statements. Not yet. Why? Alina asked. Because she thinks she still has room to move, Jonathan said. And people like her are most dangerous when they feel cornered too early. Benton leaned back slightly. So we let her think she still has time. Yes, Jonathan said. We watch, we document, we build the full case. Keller nodded. And Marcus. We find him, Jonathan said, before he disappears. A quiet settled over the room, not uncertainty, but alignment. Grace and Maya returned later that evening, not knowing the full extent of what had been uncovered, but sensing the shift in the adults around them. Grace stood near the door again, careful as always. Mr. Hayes, she said, we just wanted to check on you before heading home. Jonathan looked at them differently now, not just with gratitude, but with recognition. You're not going anywhere tonight, he said. Grace blinked. Sir. I've arranged for you both to stay in the guest wing at the estate, Jonathan continued. Security will be there, you'll be safe. Grace hesitated. We don't want to cause trouble. You're not causing it, Jonathan said. You helped stop it. Maya stepped closer. Is the bad lady gone? Jonathan considered the question. Not yet, he said, but she will be. Maya nodded, accepting that answer. Then she said, you should be careful what you sign now. For a moment the adults almost smiled. Jonathan nodded. That's very good advice. Grace placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. Say thank you. Maya looked at Jonathan. Thank you for listening this time. The words were simple, but they landed deeper than anything else that day. After they left, Jonathan sat quietly for a long moment. Alina watched him. "You're thinking, I'm remembering. What?" "The moment I took that plate back from her." Alina didn't answer. Jonathan's voice lowered. "That was the moment everything could have ended differently." "But it didn't," she said. "No," Jonathan replied, "because she didn't give up." Alina followed his gaze to the door Maya had just walked through. "Children don't always understand the world," she said. "But sometimes they see it clearer than the rest of us." Jonathan nodded slowly. Outside, the city moved as it always did, unaware, indifferent. But inside that hospital room, the pieces of a quiet, calculated betrayal had come together, and Jonathan Hayes was no longer reacting. He was preparing, because now he understood something that changed everything. Vivian hadn't just tried to poison him. She had built a system around his trust, and systems like that didn't collapse with one truth. They had to be dismantled piece by piece. By the time Jonathan Hayes was discharged from the hospital 2 days later, the world outside still believed he had suffered a minor medical incident. That was the official statement Benton had released, carefully worded, deliberately vague, and just credible enough to prevent unwanted attention. Inside the Hayes estate, however, nothing felt minor anymore. The house had been transformed. Security presence had doubled. Cameras were being rechecked, replaced, repositioned. Every staff member had been quietly interviewed, schedules reviewed, access logs analyzed. The kitchen, once the heart of the home, felt like a sealed vault. Even the scent of food had changed, as if the memory of that night still lingered in the air. Jonathan stood in his study, looking at the desk where Keller had found the recorder. It had been removed, bagged, and sent for analysis. But Jonathan could still picture it there, small, hidden, listening. He placed his hand on the edge of the desk, remembering the conversations that had taken place here. Business strategies, financial decisions, personal reflections. He had never intended anyone else to hear. "She was patient," he said quietly. Behind him, Benton nodded. "That's what makes this dangerous. This wasn't impulsive. It was constructed." Jonathan turned. "What about the accounts?" "We traced another layer," Benton said, opening his tablet. "The shell companies lead to a holding structure tied to Marcus. Offshore but not untouchable. We're building a path. How long? Long enough that he'll try to disappear if he senses pressure." Jonathan walked slowly toward the window. The estate grounds stretched wide beneath him, perfectly maintained, controlled, safe. Or at least they had seemed that way. "We don't give him that chance," Jonathan said. "We move before he knows we're close." Keller stepped in at that moment. "Sir, update on Miss Cross." Jonathan didn't turn. "Go on. She left her apartment this morning. Took 2 bags, no driver, no usual routine." Alina, who had been seated near the fireplace, looked up sharply. "She's running." "Not yet," Keller said, "but she's changing patterns." Jonathan nodded slowly. "Good. That means she's nervous. Or preparing," Benton added. Jonathan turned back to them. "Keep eyes on her, but don't approach." "Not yet." Keller nodded. "Understood." As Keller stepped out, Alina rose from her chair and walked toward her son. "You're letting her move," she said. "I'm letting her reveal," Jonathan replied. Alina studied him. "There's a difference." "I know," he said, "but right now she thinks she still has options. That's when people make mistakes." Alina folded her arms. "And if one of those mistakes hurts someone else?" Jonathan's expression darkened. "It won't." The certainty in his voice was new. Not the confidence of a businessman, but something sharper, more personal. A soft knock came from the doorway before anyone could continue. Mrs. Helen Brooks stepped in. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "Grace and Maya are settled in the guest wing. I thought you should know." Jonathan's expression softened slightly. "Thank you, Helen." Helen nodded, then hesitated. "There's something else." Jonathan waited. "I've been in this house a long time," she said. "Long enough to know when something doesn't feel right, Miss Cross." She asked too many questions about things that weren't hers. "What kind of things?" Benton asked. Helen clasped her hands. "Schedules, deliveries, security rotations." She always framed it as concern, as if she wanted to help. But now she shook her head slightly. "Now it looks different." Jonathan exchanged a glance with Benton. "Write everything down you remember. Dates, times, questions, anything." "I already started," Helen said. "It's in your study." "Good," Jonathan replied. After she left, the room fell quiet again. Alina exhaled slowly. She was mapping the house. "Yes," Jonathan said. just like she mapped everything else. That evening, Jonathan walked through the estate for the first time since returning, not as a homeowner admiring his property, but as a man searching for fractures. The dining room was exactly as it had been left, though cleaned now, restored to its polished elegance. The long table stood beneath the chandelier. The white roses had been replaced. The silver gleamed, but Jonathan didn't see beauty anymore. He saw the moment Maya had run across this floor. He saw himself taking the plate back. He saw Vivian watching. He stood at the head of the table for a long moment, then turned away. In the guest wing, Maya sat on the edge of a large bed, her doll in her lap. The room was bigger than anything she had ever slept in before, with soft lighting and thick carpets that made every step quiet. Grace stood near the window, still unsure how to exist in a space that felt borrowed. A gentle knock came at the door. Grace opened it to find Jonathan standing there. "Mr. Hayes," she said, surprised. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No, sir, not at all." He stepped inside, looking around briefly before his eyes settled on Maya. "How are you?" he asked. "I like this room," Maya said. "It's quiet, that's good." She studied him for a moment. "You look better. I feel better." She nodded as if confirming a fact she had already suspected. Jonathan glanced at Grace. "I wanted to check on you both, and to say something I didn't say properly before." Grace straightened slightly. "Sir, you've already." "No," Jonathan said gently, "not enough." He looked at Maya. "You didn't just warn me," he said. "You insisted, even when no one believed you, even when people told you to stop." Maya held her doll a little tighter. "I didn't want you to get hurt, I know," Jonathan said, "and because of that I'm still here." Grace's eyes softened, but she said nothing. Jonathan continued, "There are people now who are trying to understand what happened, and what you saw is important." Maya nodded. "I remember." "I know you do," he said, "but you won't have to do this alone, not now, not ever." Grace looked at him carefully. "Mr. Hayes, what happens next?" Jonathan paused. "That depends on how much truth we uncover," he said, "and how far this goes." Maya tilted her head slightly. "The man at the door, is he bad too?" Jonathan didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Then you should find him fast," she said, "because people like that don't wait." Jonathan almost smiled. "That's exactly what we're doing." As he left the room, Jonathan felt something settle into place. Not comfort, not relief, but clarity. Back in his study, Benton was waiting with new information. "We have a financial trigger," Benton said. "One of the shell accounts tied to Marcus just moved funds. Small amount, but recent. Within the last hour." Jonathan stepped closer. "From where?" Benton tapped the screen. "A transfer node in the city, not offshore. Local." Keller, who had just entered behind Jonathan, spoke immediately. "We can track that." Jonathan's eyes sharpened. "Do it." Benton looked at him. "If we move now, we might flush him out." Jonathan nodded once. "Then we move now." Eleanor appeared in the doorway, having heard enough to understand. "Be careful," she said. Jonathan met her gaze. "I will." Then he turned to Keller. "Get the team ready." For the first time since the night of the engagement dinner, the balance had shifted. Vivian had made her move. Now Jonathan was making his. And somewhere in the city, a man who thought he was invisible had just made the mistake of being seen. The city did not know it was being watched. Traffic moved in slow afternoon lines. People crossed streets with coffee cups in hand. Office buildings reflected the sun like glass mirrors, pretending nothing complicated ever happened inside them. It was an ordinary day for everyone except the handful of people who now understood that somewhere within that calm surface, a carefully built scheme was beginning to crack. Inside one of Hayes' group's black SUVs, Jonathan sat in the back seat, one hand resting lightly against his abdomen where the last traces of discomfort still lingered. He had insisted on coming. Benton had argued. Eleanor had refused. Dr. Webb had threatened to sedate him if necessary. But in the end, Jonathan had simply said, "This started with me. It ends with me." And no one had found a way to argue that down. Keller sat in the front passenger seat, speaking quietly into his earpiece. "Confirm position. Yes, keep distance. No contact unless instructed." On the tablet between them, a small blinking dot marked the latest movement of the account Benton had flagged. It wasn't a person, not yet, but it was a trail, and trails led somewhere. "Transfer originated from a financial kiosk," Keller said, "public access terminal. That's unusual for someone at Marcus's level." Not if he doesn't want to be traced, Jonathan replied. Or if he knows someone is already looking, Benton added from the second vehicle behind them. Jonathan leaned back slightly, thinking. He wouldn't risk a visible move unless he had to. Keller glanced at him. Meaning something changed, Jonathan said. Either Vivian warned him, or he's reacting to something we haven't seen yet. The SUV slowed as it approached a narrow commercial street lined with older buildings, laundromats, small grocery stores, a pawn shop with faded lettering. Not the kind of place where million-dollar transfers were supposed to pass unnoticed, which made it exactly the kind of place they often did. Target location ahead, Keller said. Camera picked him entering 10 minutes ago. Jonathan's eyes fixed on the entrance of a small storefront with tinted windows. No sign, no branding, just a door that looked like it didn't want attention. Marcus, Jonathan said quietly. Keller nodded. Most likely. Jonathan exhaled once. We don't go in loud, understood. The SUV came to a stop half a block away. Keller turned in his seat. Sir, you stay here. Jonathan didn't respond immediately. Jonathan, Keller said more firmly, you're not fully recovered. If this turns. I'm not walking into anything blind, Jonathan said, but I'm not sitting here either. Keller held his gaze for a second, then gave a short nod. You stay behind me, that's the idea. They stepped out into the afternoon air, which felt too normal for what they were about to do. Benton's car pulled in behind them. 2 additional security men moved into position, casual in appearance but precise in movement. The door to the storefront opened with a soft chime. Inside, the lighting was dim. Rows of terminals lined one wall, each separated by thin partitions. A few people sat at them, heads down, faces lit by screens. No one looked up when Jonathan entered. At the far end of the room, near a corner terminal, a man in a dark jacket sat slightly angled away from the others. Jonathan recognized him immediately, not from a clear face, from posture, from stillness, from the same quiet alertness Maya had described without knowing the word for it. Keller moved first, approaching slowly, not aggressive but deliberate. Marcus. The man didn't turn right away. Then he did. His face was sharper than the camera had shown. Early 40s, clean-shaven, eyes that didn't waste time pretending surprise. Well, Marcus said, leaning back slightly in his chair, that was faster than I expected. Jonathan stepped forward, stopping just behind Keller. You're not hard to find when you start moving money in daylight. Marcus's mouth curved faintly. And you're not supposed to be on your feet yet. Plans change. Marcus glanced around the room, noting the positions, the exits, the number of people who weren't as casual as they looked. Then his eyes returned to Jonathan. She didn't finish the job, he said. Jonathan didn't react outwardly. You mean Vivian? Marcus tilted his head. You say her name like you didn't trust her. That's new. Not new enough, Jonathan said. Marcus tapped the terminal lightly with one finger. You know, most men in your position would have been more careful about who they let that close. Jonathan's voice stayed level. Most men in my position don't expect someone at their table to poison them. Marcus gave a small shrug. That's the problem with comfort. It makes people predictable. Keller stepped slightly closer. You're done here. Marcus didn't move. Am I? You're leaving, Keller said. Marcus looked at Jonathan instead. You really think this ends with me? Jonathan's eyes didn't leave his. I think you're going to tell me where it goes next. Marcus smiled, but there was no humor in it. That's not how this works. No, Jonathan said, because from where I'm standing, your options are shrinking. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You're thinking too small. This was never about just moving money. Then what was it about? Marcus studied him for a long moment, as if deciding how much to say. Leverage, he said finally. Access, influence. You're not just rich, Hayes. You're connected. Infrastructure, health systems, contracts. People don't just want your money, they want your reach. Jonathan felt the weight of that settle in. And Vivian, Marcus's expression shifted slightly. She played her part. Is that what you call it? It's what it was. Jonathan stepped closer now, just enough to change the space between them. She tried to poison me. Marcus didn't flinch. She tried to make you manageable. Keller's jaw tightened. Jonathan's voice dropped. And if I had died? Marcus held his gaze. Then the next phase would have started sooner. Silence filled the space between them. The hum of the terminals, the faint sound of typing from the other users, the distant noise of the street outside, all of it faded under the weight of that answer. Jonathan spoke again, quieter now. You chose the wrong house. Marcus smiled faintly. No, I chose the right one. I just miscalculated one detail. Jonathan didn't need to ask. Maya, Marcus said. The name landed like a stone. Keller stepped forward. We're done talking. Marcus raised his hand slightly, not resisting as Keller and the other security men moved in. Careful, he said. You don't want to turn this into something public too quickly. Benton stepped in from the side. That decision isn't yours. Marcus looked at him, then back at Jonathan. You're going to want to move fast, he said, because if I'm sitting here, it means she's already moving somewhere else. Jonathan's eyes sharpened. Where? Marcus's smile returned, thin and controlled. That's the part you haven't earned yet. Keller secured him, guiding him toward the exit. As they stepped back into the sunlight, Jonathan stood still for a moment, watching Marcus being placed into the vehicle. Benton came up beside him. We have him. That's a start. Jonathan shook his head slightly. No, that's a warning. About what? Jonathan looked down the street, then back at the car where Marcus sat, calm despite everything. If he's here, she's already moving. Benton frowned. You think Vivian's ahead of us? I think she planned for this, Jonathan said, and we just triggered the next step. Keller closed the car door. We take him in. We get answers. Jonathan nodded slowly. Then we'd better do it fast, he said, because somewhere beyond the edges of what they could see, Vivian Cross was no longer reacting. She was adapting, and people like her didn't run blindly. They moved with purpose, which meant the most dangerous part of this wasn't what had already happened. It was what was about to. Marcus did not look like a man who had just been caught. That was the first thing Jonathan noticed as they moved him into the secured interview room back at the estate. Not a police station, at least not yet. Benton had made that decision carefully. They needed answers before this became public, before lawyers, media, and outside pressure complicated everything. Marcus sat in the chair with his hands loosely resting on the table, posture relaxed, eyes alert. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't protest. He didn't pretend. He waited. Jonathan stood across from him, no longer in a hospital bed, no longer reacting. Keller remained near the door, silent and watchful. Benton stood to the side, tablet ready, every word about to be recorded. You're calm, Jonathan said. Marcus gave a slight shrug. Panic is for people who don't understand the game, and you think you do. I know enough to recognize when the board changes. Jonathan pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. Then let's skip the performance. You told me this wasn't just about money. It isn't. Then talk. Marcus studied him for a moment as if measuring how much truth Jonathan could handle at once. You're a gateway, Marcus said finally, not just a target. Jonathan didn't blink. Explain. Hayes Group touches infrastructure, private healthcare, data security, logistics, Marcus continued. You're in rooms where decisions are made before the public ever hears about them. Contracts, approvals, expansions. People don't need to own your company to benefit from it. They just need influence over you. And Vivian was that influence. Yes, Jonathan leaned back slightly. By poisoning me. By weakening you, Marcus corrected slowly, subtly. Enough that your judgment slips, your guard lowers, your dependence increases. Then she steps in, handles things, signs things, moves things. Benton spoke quietly from the side, including funds from the foundation. Marcus glanced at him. That was just proof of concept. Eleanor, who had entered quietly and now stood near the back of the room, spoke for the first time. You stole from children to test your system. Marcus didn't look at her. We tested access. Jonathan's jaw tight, and the endgame, Marcus's eyes returned to Jonathan. Control without ownership. That's the cleanest way to operate. No public exposure, no board fights, just influence. Jonathan nodded slowly, and if I resisted, Marcus didn't hesitate. Then the situation escalates. Silence. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. You said something earlier. If you're here, she's already moving. Marcus smiled faintly. You remember. Where is she going? Marcus tapped his fingers lightly against the table. You're asking the wrong question again. Jonathan's voice dropped. Then give me the right one. Marcus's gaze sharpened. What does she have that you haven't found yet? That shifted the room. Benton looked up from his tablet. Keller's posture changed slightly. Jonathan didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he said, documents. Marcus didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. Eleanor stepped forward. What documents? Jonathan's mind was already moving. The study, he said. She was in the study last week. Helen confirmed it. Benton nodded slowly. We checked the desk, the safe, the primary files, not just what was there, Jonathan said. What used to be there? Marcus leaned back, watching him now with something closer to interest. There it is, he said quietly. You're catching up. Jonathan stood abruptly, turning toward Benton. Pull a full inventory of the study archives. Every file, physical and digital, cross-check against backups. Already started, Benton said, but that could take time. We don't have time. Keller stepped forward, sir. If she took something, she'll use it. Or leverage it, Jonathan said. Eleanor's voice was sharp. Against who? Jonathan didn't answer immediately. Then he said, everyone connected to me. The weight of that settled heavily. Marcus watched them, silent now, as if his role in the conversation was already complete. Jonathan turned back to him. You're going to tell me exactly what she took. Marcus shook his head slightly. I don't know specifics, that wasn't my part. Then what was your part? Structure, access points, movement channels, making sure that when something needed to move, it moved clean. And now, Marcus's expression didn't change. Now I'm sitting here, Jonathan stepped closer, and she's not. No, Marcus said, she's not. The implication was clear. Jonathan turned to Keller. Lock down all outbound data from the estate. No external access. No file transfers. I want every system isolated. Keller nodded immediately. Audit, Jonathan continued. Contact our internal tech team. Full audit. Anything accessed, copied, or removed in the last 30 days. Benton was already moving. I'll get them on secure line. Eleanor looked at her son. Jonathan, if she has something sensitive, she does, he said. We just don't know what yet. At that moment, Keller's earpiece buzzed. He turned slightly, listening. Then his expression changed. Sir, he said, we have a situation. Jonathan's focus snapped to him. What kind of situation? Guest wing, Keller said. Maya, the room shifted instantly. What about her? Jonathan asked, his voice sharper now. Security reports an unauthorized vehicle near the rear access road. It didn't enter the property, but it stopped long enough to observe. Then it left. Eleanor's face went pale. You think? I don't think anything yet, Keller said, but the timing is wrong. Jonathan didn't hesitate. Get eyes on that vehicle now, already in progress. Jonathan turned back to Marcus, his voice colder than before. Did she know about the girl? Marcus met his gaze. She knew the girl saw her. Did she plan for that? Marcus didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Jonathan felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not exactly. Something sharper, protective, focused. Move him, Jonathan said to Keller. Secure location. No contact. Keller nodded and signaled the team. As Marcus was escorted out, he glanced once more at Jonathan. You're running out of time, he said quietly. Jonathan didn't respond. Because for the first time since this began, the danger had changed shape. It was no longer just about him. It was about Maya. Minutes later, Jonathan was already moving through the estate faster than his body was fully ready for. Eleanor followed close behind despite Benton's attempts to slow her down. Jonathan, wait. No, he said, not this time. They reached the guest wing. Security stood outside, alert but controlled. Grace opened the door before Jonathan could knock. Her face showed it immediately. What's happening? She asked. Maya stood behind her, quiet, watching. Jonathan softened his voice, though urgency remained. We're increasing security. Nothing has happened, but we're being careful. Grace's eyes searched his face. This is about last night, isn't it? Yes. Maya stepped forward slightly. The bad lady. Jonathan met her eyes. She's still out there, he said, and we're making sure she can't hurt anyone. Maya nodded slowly, absorbing that. Then she said something that made every adult in the room pause. She knows I saw her. Grace tightened her grip on Maya's shoulder. Baby, no, Maya said quietly. She looked at me like she knew. Jonathan felt that settle heavily. He crouched slightly so he was closer to her level. You're safe here. I promise you that. Maya looked at him not with fear but with a kind of serious trust that felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed. Then you should find her fast, she said. Jonathan stood again. I will, he said. As he stepped back into the hallway, Keller approached with an update. Vehicles gone, plate obscured. We're pulling street cams. Jonathan nodded once. Behind him, Grace closed the door to the guest room, holding her daughter close, not out of panic but out of instinct. In the quiet that followed, Jonathan understood something with absolute clarity. Vivian Cross had lost control of the plan, but she hadn't lost the will to finish it. And now, the one person who had exposed her was no longer just a witness. She was a risk, which meant the next move wouldn't be about money. It would be about silence. The estate no longer felt like a home. By nightfall, every entrance was guarded, every corridor monitored, every shadow questioned. What had once been a place of quiet control had turned into a perimeter under watch, not because Jonathan Hayes feared what had already happened, but because he understood what might come next. Silence. That was what men like Marcus meant when they stopped talking. And that was what people like Vivian Cross chose when control slipped from their hands. Jonathan stood in the main security room, a space few guests had ever seen. Walls lined with screens showed every angle of the estate: gates, gardens, hallways, service paths, even the long private road leading up from the main highway. Keller stood beside him, issuing low commands to the team, adjusting camera feeds, marking timestamps. Street cameras picked up the vehicle 2 blocks out, Keller said. Black sedan, partial plate, still obscured, we're enhancing. Driver, Jonathan asked. Covered. Capped glasses, could be anyone. Jonathan nodded slowly. It wasn't random. No, Keller agreed. They were watching. Jonathan didn't need confirmation. He already knew. Behind them, Benton entered with a tablet in hand, his expression tighter than before. We have something from the study audit. Jonathan turned. Tell me. Benton handed him the screen. A file is missing, not obvious at first glance, but the index doesn't match the backup. Jonathan scanned quickly. Which file? Private contract folder, Benton said. High-level agreements, government-adjacent infrastructure expansions, hospital network integration, data routing agreements. Alina, who had just entered behind Benton, stopped mid-step. Those are restricted. Yes, Benton said. And valuable. Jonathan's eyes darkened. Leverage, Benton nodded. If she copied or removed those, she doesn't just have financial leverage. She has influence over contracts that affect entire systems. Alina's voice dropped. Hospitals, data systems, public services. Jonathan handed the tablet back slowly. She didn't just plan to control me. No, Benton said. She planned to control what moves through you. The room went still. Keller broke the silence. Then we escalate protection. Jonathan nodded. Every system, every contract, every access point. Lock it down. And Maya, Alina asked quietly. Jonathan didn't hesitate. She stays protected. Keller added, we can move her and her mother to a secondary location. Grace's voice came from the doorway before anyone else could respond. No, they all turned. Grace stood there, her posture steady but her eyes alert. Maya stood just behind her, quiet as always, holding her doll. I'm sorry, Grace said, but we're not being moved around like we're something to hide. Jonathan stepped toward her. This isn't about hiding, it's about safety. Grace met his gaze. Then we stay where you can see us. There was no defiance in her tone, only clarity. Alina studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. She's right. Jonathan exhaled once. Then you stay here. But security stays close. Grace nodded. That's fine. Maya stepped forward a little. Is she coming here? The room quieted. Jonathan crouched slightly so he could look at her directly. No, not without us knowing. Maya thought about that, but she might try. Jonathan didn't lie. Yes. Maya nodded again, as if placing that fact neatly into her understanding of the world. Then we should be ready. Keller almost smiled. Jonathan stood. We are. Later that night, the estate grew quieter, but it was not the peaceful quiet of before. It was a waiting quiet, the kind that sits just beneath the surface, listening. Jonathan returned to his study. The desk was cleared now. No recorder. No hidden devices, just wood, polished and empty. But it no longer felt like a place of thought. It felt like a place that had been watched. He opened the drawer where the missing files had once been stored. Empty. He closed it slowly. She planned this, he said to himself. She adapted. Alina's voice answered from the doorway. He turned. You're still awake. I raised you, she said. I don't sleep when things are unfinished. Jonathan leaned back slightly against the desk. She took the contracts. She set up the accounts. She brought in Marcus. And she underestimated a child, Alina added. Jonathan nodded. That's the only reason we're not having a very different conversation. Alina stepped into the room. Then don't waste that reason. Jonathan looked at her. I won't. Before he could say more, Keller's voice came through the comm system. Sir, we have movement. Jonathan straightened instantly. Where? Rear perimeter, same sector as earlier. Jonathan was already moving. Within seconds he was back in the security room. The screen showed it clearly this time. The same black sedan parked just beyond the outer gate. Not moving, not hiding, waiting. Zoom, Jonathan said. The image tightened. The driver's window rolled down slightly. A hand appeared holding something. Keller frowned. What is that? Jonathan's eyes narrowed. Envelope. The same size, the same shape, just like the one Vivian had handed Marcus. Don't open the gate, Jonathan said. Not planning to, Keller replied. The car didn't move. After a few seconds, the driver stepped out, face partially covered. Same posture, deliberate. He walked toward the gate, stopped just short, and placed the envelope on the ground. Then he stepped back, got into the car, and drove away. No rush. No panic, just precision. Silence filled the room again. Jonathan stared at the screen. It's a message, Benton said quietly. Alina's voice was colder, or a threat. Jonathan turned to Keller. Send a team. Full precaution. Don't touch it directly. Keller nodded and moved immediately. Minutes later, the envelope was brought inside, sealed within a protective bag. It sat now on the table in the security room, untouched. Jonathan stepped closer. Scan first, he said. A technician moved in, running a portable scanner over the surface. No immediate triggers, no wiring, no chemical flags. Open it. Carefully with gloves, the envelope was slit. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once. Keller handed it to Jonathan. Jonathan unfolded it slowly. There was only one line typed clean. You stopped one bite, you won't stop the next move. No signature, no explanation, but Jonathan didn't need one. He looked up. She's not running, he said. Benton frowned. No. Jonathan shook his head slowly. She's still playing. Alina crossed her arms, then we end it. Jonathan's grip tightened slightly on the paper. No, he said. We finish it. Behind him, Maya stood quietly in the doorway, unnoticed until she spoke. That's not a message, she said. They all turned. Jonathan looked at her. What is it? Maya stepped a little closer, her eyes on the paper. It's a warning, she said. Silence followed. Jonathan looked back at the message, then at the screens, then at the gate where the car had been. And in that moment, he understood something with absolute clarity. Vivian Cross wasn't trying to disappear. She was trying to control how this ended. And she had just made it clear. The next move wasn't going to be hidden. It was going to be direct. The message did not leave the room. Jonathan stood with the paper still in his hand, reading the same line again. Not because he didn't understand it, but because he needed to understand how it had been written. Not the words themselves, but the intention behind them. You stopped one bite. You won't stop the next move. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't angry. It wasn't desperate. It was controlled. She's not panicking, Jonathan said quietly. Benton nodded. No, this is calculated. Alina's voice was sharper. Then she's overconfident. Jonathan shook his head. No, she thinks she still has leverage. Keller stepped closer to the table. Then we assume she's going to use it. Maya remained near the doorway, silent again, but watching everything. Not with fear, just with that same steady attention that had changed everything once already. Jonathan folded the paper carefully and placed it back on the table. We need to know what she has, he said. Benton tapped his tablet. The missing contract files are still our best lead. If she copied them, she could be positioning for blackmail, negotiation, or something worse. Alina added, or to force your hand before you can act. Jonathan nodded. Exactly. Keller's earpiece buzzed again. He listened, then spoke. We've pulled additional street footage. The vehicle that dropped the envelope, same one from earlier, but this time we have a clearer angle on the driver's face. Jonathan turned, running it now, seconds stretched. Then one of the analysts spoke from across the room. We have a match. Jonathan stepped closer. Who? The analyst turned the screen. A name appeared, Daniel Cross. Benton frowned. That's not Marcus. No, Keller said, but he's connected. Financial courier, mid-level operator, works under people like Marcus. Jonathan's mind moved quickly. So Marcus wasn't the only one. Never is, Keller said. Alina crossed her arms. And now this one is delivering messages. Jonathan looked at the screen, studying the face, which means he's still in contact with her. Benton nodded and close enough to move quickly. Jonathan turned sharply. Track him. We are, Keller said. Last known direction, heading east out of the district. Don't lose him, Jonathan said. Keller didn't respond. He didn't need to. The room shifted into motion again. Quiet but urgent. Jonathan stepped back thinking, she wants us to react, he said. Alina looked at him, and you don't intend to, I intend to react the right way. Benton raised an eyebrow, meaning. Jonathan looked at the screens. We've been following her moves. It's time she follows ours. That caught their attention. Alina tilted her head slightly. Explain. Jonathan turned to Benton. What's the status of the foundation accounts? Frozen, Benton said. We locked all outgoing transfers. Good. Now unlock one. Benton frowned. Which one? The smallest, Jonathan said. One she's already touched. Make it look like we're restoring normal operations. Alina's eyes sharpened. You're baiting her. Yes. Benton considered it. If she's watching, she'll see activity and assume we're stabilizing, not escalating. Exactly, Jonathan said. She'll think she still has time. Keller added. And if Cross is still moving for her, he'll move again. Jonathan nodded. And this time we're ready. There was a pause. Then Alina said quietly, you're thinking like her now. Jonathan didn't smile. I'm thinking ahead of her. Across the room, Maya shifted slightly. Jonathan noticed. What is it? He asked. Maya looked at the screens, then at the paper on the table. She's not just watching you, she said. Jonathan stepped closer. What do you mean? Maya hesitated for a second, then said. If she knows what you're doing, she might try to make you stop. Alina's expression tightened. How? Maya looked at her, then back at Jonathan. By making you scared. Not the kind that comes from confusion. The kind that comes from recognition. Jonathan exhaled slowly. She already tried that. Maya shook her head slightly. No, that was before. Jonathan studied her. Before what? Before you knew everything, Maya said. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Benton spoke quietly. She's right. Alina turned to him. You agree with a child over trained analysts. Now, I agree with logic, Benton said. Before, Vivian had control. Now she's losing it. That changes her strategy. Jonathan nodded slowly. She escalates. Keller added, which means we don't just track, we anticipate. Jonathan looked at the screens again, then back at Maya. What would you do? He asked. The question surprised everyone. Maya blinked. Me? Yes, she thought about it. I make you look the wrong way, she said. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly. So you don't see where I'm really going? Yes. Benton straightened. A distraction. Alina turned toward Jonathan. The envelope. Jonathan nodded. And the car. Keller's voice sharpened. Then Cross might not be the real move. Jonathan turned. He's part of it, but not the center. Benton tapped his tablet quickly. If she wanted us focused here, then where isn't she? The answer came almost at the same time. The study, Alina said. The contracts, Benton added. The data, Keller finished. Jonathan moved immediately. Check remote access logs again, not just the house, every connected system. Keller relayed the order. Seconds later, the analyst's voice cut through the room. We have activity. Jonathan stepped forward. Where? External server, the analyst said. Attempted access to archived contract database just now. Benton's voice dropped. She's pulling something. Can we stop it? Alina asked. The analyst shook his head. Encrypted channel, but we're tracing the end point. Jonathan's eyes locked onto the screen. Where is it? He asked. The analyst hesitated for half a second, then said, downtown, financial district. Jonathan turned to Keller. Cross was heading east. Yes. Jonathan's voice hardened. He's not the distraction. Benton looked at him. Then what is? Jonathan didn't answer right away. He looked at the message again. You won't stop the next move. Then he looked at Maya. She wanted us to think the next move was coming here, he said. Alina's voice dropped, but it's already happening somewhere else. Jonathan nodded. She's not coming to us, he said. She's taking something and leaving. Keller stepped forward. We can move now. Jonathan was already heading for the door. Yes, he said. We move now. Behind him, Alina followed without hesitation. Benton grabbed his tablet. Keller began issuing rapid commands, and Maya stood quietly in the doorway again, watching the adults finally move in the right direction. Because the danger hadn't passed. It had just shifted. And this time they were one step behind it. The financial district never really slept, but that night it felt like it was holding its breath. Glass towers reflected the city lights in sharp angles, and the streets below hummed with late traffic and quiet urgency. Inside one of those towers, several floors above ground level, something was already in motion. And this time, Jonathan Hayes was not going to arrive too late. The convoy moved fast but controlled. 2 SUVs in front, 1 behind. No sirens, no noise, just precision. Inside the lead vehicle, Jonathan sat forward, no longer leaning back like a recovering patient. The weakness was still there, but it had been replaced by something stronger, focus sharpened by betrayal. Benton's voice came through the secure line. We've isolated the access point to a private server room on the 23rd floor. It's leased under a shell company, one of Marcus's structures. Jonathan nodded, even though Benton couldn't see him. Security. Minimal on record, Benton replied. But that doesn't mean unprotected. Keller added from the front seat. We assume resistance. Good, Jonathan said, so do we. The vehicles pulled into an underground garage beneath the building. The engine cut and the quiet that followed felt heavier than noise. Everyone clear? Keller asked. Short confirmations came through. Jonathan stepped out. The air in the garage was cooler, sharper. It smelled faintly of concrete and oil, ordinary, grounding. He adjusted his jacket slightly, ignoring the dull reminder in his abdomen that he was not fully recovered. Stay close, Keller said. Jonathan didn't argue. They moved quickly toward the service elevator. Keller swiped a cloned access card Benton's team had prepared. The doors opened with a soft mechanical sound. Inside, no one spoke. The numbers climbed. 23. The doors opened to a dim hallway. No receptionist, no signage, just a narrow corridor leading to a secure door at the far end. Keller raised a hand, signaling stillness. One of the team moved forward, scanning the lock. Electronic, encrypted. How long? Keller asked. 30 seconds. Jonathan stood just behind them, eyes fixed on the door. She's here, he said quietly. Benton's voice came through again. Activity spiked just now. Data transfer accelerating. Then we don't have 30 seconds, Jonathan replied. Keller looked at the technician. Faster. The man adjusted his device, bypassing protocols with controlled urgency. 20 seconds. 15. A soft click. The door unlocked. Keller pushed it open. Inside, the room was larger than expected. Rows of servers lined the walls, lights blinking in steady rhythm. The hum of cooling systems filled the air. And at the center, Vivian Cross stood at a terminal. She didn't turn immediately. She didn't run. She simply kept typing for one more second. Then she stopped and slowly turned around. Her expression was calm, too calm. I was wondering how long it would take you, she said. Jonathan stepped forward, stopping just inside the room. Not long enough. Vivian's eyes moved briefly across the team, then settled on him. You look better. That's unfortunate, she said softly. Keller stepped to the side, positioning his team. Step away from the terminal. Vivian didn't move. You're already too late, she said. Benton's voice came sharply through the comms. Transfer at 80%. Jonathan's gaze flicked to the screen behind her. Lines of data moved rapidly. What did you take? He asked. Vivian smiled faintly. Not take, secure. For who? For whoever understands its value. Jonathan's voice hardened. You poisoned me for this. Vivian tilted her head slightly. No, I prepared you. That's not how this ends. Her smile didn't change. You don't decide that anymore. Keller stepped forward. Step away now. Vivian finally moved, not toward them, toward the console beside her. Her hand hovered over a key. Don't, Jonathan said. She looked at him, and for the first time there was something real in her expression. Not fear, not anger, conviction. You should have listened to me, she said. Then she pressed the key. The screens flickered. The data transfer completed. Benton's voice came through tight. It's done. Full extraction. Silence filled the room for half a second. Then Keller moved. Vivian didn't resist as she was pulled back from the terminal. No struggle, no panic, just that same calm expression. Jonathan stepped closer to the screen, scanning the final output. What did you send? He asked. Vivian didn't answer. Jonathan turned back to her. What did you just give away? She met his eyes. Not give, she said. Position. Aliner's voice came through the calm line from the estate, sharp and controlled. Jonathan, what's happening? He didn't look away from Vivian. She completed the transfer. A pause. Then Aliner said quietly, Then whatever she took, it's out now. Jonathan nodded slightly. Vivian watched him. You still don't see it, she said. Then explain it, he replied. She leaned back slightly against Keller's hold, her voice lowering just enough to feel personal. You think this was about controlling you, she said. It wasn't. Jonathan didn't react. It was about access, she continued. And now that access is shared. Benton cut in urgently. We're tracking the end point, but it's splitting. Multiple destinations. Jonathan's jaw tightened. How many? 3. No, 5. It's fragmenting. Vivian smiled again. You're not chasing one problem anymore, she said. You're chasing five. Keller secured her hands behind her back. This is over, he said. Vivian shook her head slightly. No, she said. This is exactly where it begins. Jonathan stepped closer, close enough now that there was no distance left for illusion. You lost, he said quietly. Vivian looked at him, really looked at him this time. No, she replied. I just changed the board. Silence settled again, heavier than before. Because this time she wasn't bluffing. Benton's voice came through tense. Jonathan, whatever she sent, it's already moving through external systems. This is bigger than internal control now. Jonathan stood still for a moment, then nodded once. Then we stop it at every end point, he said. Keller looked at him. That's not a small task. Jonathan's eyes didn't leave the screen. Neither is what she started. Behind him, Vivian said softly, You're too late to contain it. Jonathan turned back to her. Maybe, he said. Then his voice dropped, but not too late to finish you. For the first time since they entered the room, Vivian didn't smile, because she understood something in that moment. The plan had succeeded. The data was out. The system was broken open. But Jonathan Hayes wasn't reacting anymore. He was hunting, and whatever came next, he was no longer one step behind. He was coming straight through the center. The servers kept humming, but the illusion of control was gone. The story reminds us that truth often comes from the most unexpected voices, and ignoring it can come at a dangerous cost. It teaches that power and intelligence mean little without humility, the ability to listen, especially to those society tends to overlook. Maya's courage shows that integrity does not depend on age or status, while Jonathan's journey reveals that real strength lies in admitting mistakes and choosing to correct them. In the end, the story warns that betrayal often hides behind trust, but justice can still prevail when people choose to stand firm, protect the innocent, and pursue the truth without compromise. What would you have done if you were sitting at that table? Would you have listened to the child, or would you have taken the bite like Jonathan did? Think about it for a moment, because sometimes the difference between life and disaster is simply choosing to believe the person everyone else is telling you to ignore. If this story made you think, or if it reminded you of a time when someone unexpected told you the truth and you almost didn't listen, I want to hear about it in the comments. And if you're curious about what happened next, if you want to know whether Jonathan and his team were able to track down all 5 data fragments and stop Vivian's plan for good, you won't want to miss the next story. There's another case coming up that might just surprise you, one that involves a different kind of betrayal, a different kind of witness, and a truth that changes everything. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and remember, sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths.